Hi everybody, my name is Tom Chesterton. I'm the Managing Director of a brand consultancy in London called Tonic. This is episode 6 of TonicWith, the series where we meet interesting people from the world of talent and learning and development, and get a sense of where they are in their career, the journey they've been on, and the things that they've learned along the way. So far, in the first 5 episodes of this, we've talked to some people from as far afield as the Arab Emirates and Aberdeen and mostly the UK. We've reached about 10 countries, and with an average viewership, I suppose, of about 1,000 people. Really excited about today's conversation, which is with Helen Baxter. Helen is learning and development specialist, working for an organisation called Ooredoo in Qatar. Helen, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that really badly, but maybe you could give a little bit of an overview about who you are and how you came to work for Ooredoo.
Sure. So my background actually wasn't HR, so I started out in shift operations, which actually gave me a really good grounding for then moving into HR at a later point, because I actually understood I guess the challenges of managing up to 50 people at any one time and the stresses and strains of being in a moment-to-moment environment. So I'd worked for Christian Salmson and then Unilever before moving to Mars into HR. So I was really lucky to get that opportunity, and spent 17 years at Mars in a variety of roles, ending up as head of talent for their pet care and food business. And then, like you do, started to look around for my next opportunity. Really wanted to think about how did I broaden my experience, but also how did I continue to learn and grow, and therefore moving to another region felt like a really great opportunity, and found myself moving out of FMCG for the first time in 20 odd years and into telecommunications. Working for Ooredoo at the group level, so responsible for working with the opcos around Asia and the Middle East, and getting them on board with our talent processes and development processes.
Cool. So my pronunciation wasn't all that bad by the sounds of things, but I'm guessing that there are many people who know less about the group than I do, and certainly than you do. Maybe you could just give an overview on who Ooredoo are and what you do.
Sure. So Ooredoo started out as QTEL International, so the biggest telephone communications business in Qatar. So started out as state-owned and then moved into stakeholder ownership. And as they did that, they started to grow. So have been buying up and buying partnerships in other telecoms businesses across the Middle East, so in Oman, in Kuwait, in Iraq, in Palestine, into Indonesia, and recently won the license for Myanmar. So we've just gone live in Myanmar, got over 1 million customers in the first 7 days, which is a record in telecoms. So in terms of opportunity, breadth of business, size of business, it's
wow, that sounds an incredibly interesting business to be in. So I'm always interested in the person behind the professional. So tell us a little bit about you, and how did you manage to find yourself on that career path? What's the thing that motivates you as you're working through your career?
So I actually always dreamt that I was going to be a world famous 3-day event rider when I left university. Passion for horses, still have a passion for horses, and actually was teaching riding and competing and bringing on young horses myself, and discovered actually I probably wasn't ever going to make the Olympics, and B, I probably wasn't good enough to make a career that supported myself out of that, and therefore turned my attentions to the pieces of that work that I loved, which was seeing people develop, seeing people build capability that they didn't believe that they could do, and becoming top performers, and therefore it seemed an equal jump into the kind of talent and development space. And that's the piece I love, is seeing people develop, seeing people take opportunities they didn't think that they could do, and really thriving.
Seems like a lot of people who have that kind of sporting background, that kind of ambition to achieve excellence in the sporting environment. So I think about the people behind Lane 4, for example, have a high level of affinity with the HR, learning and development, and maximising performance arena, if you like. So is that true for you as well?
Yeah, I think there's something that you learn through the discipline of being competitive yourself, increasing in small degrees, seeking out the kind of opportunities to practice, to create perfection, seeking out the kind of areas where you're challenging yourself. When I was riding, I would get quite nervous before a big performance, but the adrenaline and that kind of push to continue to improve myself was the thing that always drove me on, and I see that in the learning space.
Okay. And just so we're clear, you're talking about 3-day eventing, which is that's not dressage and that sort of stuff. This is the proper riding horses around country parks.
It's all three, so it's dressage, show jumping, and cross country. Yeah.
Okay, so I've never understood dressage, so another time you'll have to explain me the rules on that.
Yeah, me either.
Fair enough. So I'm guessing then, if you looked at the role model that you aspire to emulate, that may be somebody from the world of sport rather than from the world of business or from the world of HR.
So I guess that there are, in the world of sport and in particularly equestrian, it would be Mark Todd. So, won Olympic medals, won all the big kind of 3-day events around the world, and in fact competed at badminton horse trials, seen as the kind of the toughest globally, with only one stirrup. So had that kind of desire, the focus, and the belief in himself to complete the toughest course in the world with only one stirrup, and yet was personable, would always spare time to give riders that were coming up through the circuit his advice. So definitely I would aspire to be like.
Okay. And what about from a business perspective? Is there anybody who particularly has connected with you, or you've looked at and said, okay, they do it exactly the way that I think work should be done or business should be done?
Yeah, so I think Mark Johnson, who was the previous director of the pet care business in the UK, has since gone on to run the Russian business for Mars. So he was somebody that was really clear about his goals, that was willing to take input and course correction, but kind of driving the relentlessness to deliver, and brought the pet care business back into growth, and engaged the kind of population and the team along the way. So it was inclusive rather than exclusive.
Okay, great leader by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
And I guess all of us along the way in our career, it's not always about success. Sometimes it can be about things that go wrong and learning from that. So is there a time that stands out for you in terms of where things haven't quite gone to in the direction you'd want them to go in? Is there an area that if you look back, you might well look at things and say, okay, I would do that differently now?
Yes, definitely. So when I joined Unilever, were moving from a 5-day-a-week, 8-hour shift cycle to a 7-day, 12-hour shift rotating pattern. Average age of the workforce was around 58, and I opened on the first day to a lot of people that were a lot more experienced and a lot other than I was. And I wish I had prepared more. I wish I'd thought more about the consequences of that change for those people, and therefore how I could use that moment in time to create a really sense of shared purpose, shared vision, and excitement about the future.
Yeah, okay. And so what would you do differently now? If you could put yourself back in that position, how would you approach that differently, apart from preparing more?
So I think there's an element of putting yourself in their shoes, and really understanding it from their point of view, their history, their background, and using that as the catalyst to create something more meaningful moving forward.
Okay. And I guess the counterpoint to that question, I always love that question, because it's the point at which you go, okay, so in my career there's something I wish I could have done differently, and this is how if the world was a perfect place, here's how I would do it better. I'm always interested in why people feel good about their career, and we've done lots of work together in terms of brand, and I'm not sure whether that would be the thing that stands out for you in terms of the thing you're most proud of.
So yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I'm most proud of is the work that we did with Tonic on the not just the employer brand for the UK, but Mars globally. Employer brand is the framework, the flexibility of that framework, and actually then the kind of realisation of that in the UK and the impact around particularly the graduate space. So, the fact we won RAD awards year on year, the fact that our uptake of graduate applications on the increase, and our rise through the Times Top 100 as well. So all the work we set out to achieve coming into fruition and realisation, it's just fantastic.
It's a great piece of work to work on together, and I think that it's true to say that that was a real co-production in terms of the thinking that went into the campaign in its own right. And I know that one of the challenges that employers often face is that the idea, and having the idea in the first instance, is a big hurdle to overcome, but then also selling it into the organisation is the second big hurdle. And I don't know whether that's one of the things that, as the market for talent becomes more competitive, becomes tighter, and the need to be more innovative becomes, I suppose, more pressing, that's going to be a challenge that employers face more often. And I don't know whether you've got any hints or tips for the wider community that you think might be helpful in terms of that process of engaging such senior stakeholders who ultimately hold the budget.
So I think for me there are a number of lessons that we learned through that process, and that I would encourage people to think about. So one is actually thinking like a marketeer, so thinking about your brand marketeers and how do they build out the kind of justifications for the brand advertising that they do, because it's a similar process, and your ROI and your numbers need to stack up in the same way that a brand plan needs to stack up. So getting close to your marketeers and understanding their process, I think really helps, because then when you go back to the business and talk about it, you talk in a way that they're used to being talked to, rather than soft. What if belief in the mindset of the management team, so really painting the picture of the future, and again, taking the learning from consumer insight. So if you were launching a pedigree product, you wouldn't do that without having taken some consumer insights. So really understanding your marketplace, using the data that's available. That doesn't necessarily mean about running lots of focus groups. There's lots of really good data out there from Trendance and Gallup and Times Top 100 that you can use to build your argument and create belief in the work that you're going to do.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think using data, you can overanalyze the market, but I think using some data and using insight is really critical in making sure that the messages that you're going to try and communicate do land and are on track with the people that you're trying to communicate with. So I guess one of the things that you can expand on from that is, if you look at the market for acquiring talent over the next 4 or 5 years, the challenges that we're going to face as employers and as agencies and other partners is going to change considerably. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts around what the market will look like and what the challenges will be. Do you think they'll be consistent, or do you think that they'll change at the same pace that they have done over the last 4 or 5 years?
And I think they're going to change by marketplace. That's one of the things about coming to the Middle East has taught me. The challenges here in this region are very different. The challenges in the technology industry are very different. So people haven't got the skill sets necessarily yet, because we don't know what the skill sets are going to be around digital moving forward, around telecom. So how do you go out and recruit people for some skills profiles that you don't know necessarily exist at the moment and aren't even being taught at university? So there's some challenges, particularly in telecoms, around that future skill set. In the Middle East, there's some challenges around the attractiveness of the region, the kind of cultural pieces around the region, and I think that will play out also across, in emerged markets. The profile will also begin to change as we look to emerged markets maybe not being so the forerunners anymore. So if I think about the Vodafones, the Oranges, they're in emerged markets where actually it's about incremental growth or otherwise radical kind of shift in their business model, and therefore again what are the skill sets that they might need. So it's that whole challenge around how do you preempt the skill sets that you're going to need, how do you preempt the competencies that you're going to need, and then either how do you develop them in-house if they don't exist externally, and if they're in short supply, how do you create the employer brand that is therefore desirable to those types of people.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that I think you're right about the excitement of working in a market like Qatar and Myanmar is actually the differences that brings from an established and slow growing market like the UK, for example, where everything is pretty much established, is that things do work at a completely different pace. And I guess that must be one of the most interesting things about working for an organisation like Ooredoo, who are on a really strong growth path in a market that's really strongly growing. It's a completely different dynamic.
It is, and even across our business, so Miramar, the last greenfield site for telecommunications. So in terms of the skill set we need there, it's about startup, it's about creation. If I look at Qatar, it's a developed market. It's pretty stable in terms of growth. There's us and Vodafone really as the two key players. So it's a very different kind of battle in terms of talent and capability. So it's exciting in that you get the myriad of types of market, and it's exciting in the ambitions that the organisation has as well in terms of growth and acquisition.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Really, really fascinating. Thanks very much for that insight. I guess one of the things that you'll be in a unique position to be able to look at is if you were to try and describe excellence in both the UK but also in Qatar for an organisation that's doing talent attraction and learning and development and people development really, really well. Is there somebody or an organisation that stands out to you as being the most successful or the archetype that other people ought to try and aspire to be like?
So I would say, my experience at Mars was one where I would say, they span the globe. So they're working in all markets in terms of their philosophy around people development, in terms of their absolutely holding fundamentally tight to the caliber of people that they're looking to bring in, and in terms of the breadth of development opportunity and just individual opportunity that you get in the organisation, and the clarity they now have around people development that aligned to business strategy is second to none versus what else I've experienced anywhere. Okay.
And so does that apply in terms of talent acquisition as well, in terms of marketing and telling the story about the organisation?
So I think we were getting stronger around that. So, because Mars is privately owned, they've been quite reticent about going out and shouting publicly about what they do. There's been a real transition over the last 3 to 4 years, and I think some of that work's come into fruition. If I think about other people that I think do that well, it would be some of the big banks, I think, in terms of employer brands. So, RBS and some of the big accountancy houses. I recognise they have huge sums of money to spend in that kind of attraction marketplace, but I think they also go out well with a clear message. They're clear about the numbers that they're looking for and where they're looking for those numbers, and they go out ruthlessly and do that. Okay, cool. Sounds good insight. Thank you very much. So if you were, I guess, applying some of that thinking into what you're aiming to do over the next maybe year or so, does it mean for you trying to move Ooredoo into that space and trying to increase and improve the way that the brand is made visible? I think that it's easy to look at that through the lens of the UK where the brand isn't known, but in markets where the brand is, as you say, one of a two-part player delivering telecoms and high-end tech to consumers, that must be a very different dynamic. So what are the aims for you from a professional perspective over the next 12 months? So I guess there are a number. So one is around as we consolidate the group. So not all of the businesses were called Ooredoo. So we're, at the moment, the kind of global comms and marketing team are bringing everybody into the Ooredoo frame, and therefore one of my roles is around aligning the talent processes to an Ooredoo framework. So that's competencies, assessment, and part of that also clearly is the employer brand and what's that EVP. externally, and then how do we go out and execute that in each of the very different marketplaces.
Okay. And I just wanted, before we close, just ask you if you've got any words of inspirational guidance for people who are maybe beginning that talent acquisition, talent development journey right now. What would you say the most important things to take into account are?
So I think never underestimate the value of spending time actually in the business and on the business. So understanding, what's important in the strategy, and then what does that mean for the function. So if you're recruiting sales guys, what are the killer things in that function at the moment that are giving distinctiveness and winning the kind of battle in whatever that sales arena is, and then how do you build that into the way you recruit, the way you message to candidates. And I think sometimes it's easy for HR people to sit in their HR kind of team and HR, so we physically have to go down into the other business units and other levels, and spending time with them, understanding, is really, really important.
Yeah, okay, cool, thank you, good advice. So I just want to say thank you very much to you personally for taking some time out of your schedule to talk to us today. Really appreciate you sticking with the technology. I know it's been a bit iffy from time to time during this conversation, but thank you, Helen Baxter. Look forward to seeing what Urdu do over the next 12 months and see how that message starts to come out. And we'll share some of the things that you've talked about today in the notes for this conversation. So just want to say thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Fabulous, thank you.